All right. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everybody. And I'm happy to be moderating this LCOY event. My name is Arpit Chaturvedi. I am the Chief Executive Officer of Global Policy Insights, which is a think tank that works on issues around international political economy, governance, and sustainability. And we have this great fellowship called the GPODS Fellowship Program. And today I have some of our Global Policy, Diplomacy, and Sustainability alums joining us to discuss a very important topic, which is policies to deal with water pollution for better health outcome. I also thank our partner organization, the Young Professionals in Foreign Policy, the Tokyo chapter, for making this happen. And without further ado, since this is a topic that would warrant a lot of detailed discussion, I would like to invite each of our fellows to introduce themselves and probably just also mention very quickly the number one concern regarding water policy that they have, and we will start discussing that in greater detail. So let me first bring over Ishwarya to introduce herself. Ishwarya, over to you.
Thank you, Arpit, and good day, everyone. I'm Aishwarya Kandasamy, currently practicing lawyer in the Lincoln Global Law Chambers based in Chennai, India. I'm also the very latest alum from GPODS Fellowship and a member of Yango and Unify.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
One policy issue, like, am I supposed to add one policy?
Yes, please, please go ahead.
Yeah. In that case, I would say.
Ishwarya, I think we lost you there for a bit. Would you want to repeat what's the most pressing policy issue around water that gives you sleepless nights? So over to you back again, and then we'll go over to Eduardo.
Yeah, the first and the most pressing, which I believe is stringent policies and all-encompassing policies, which also keeps in mind the different forms of pollution when it comes to water pollution. Yeah.
Sure. So how we frame policies and how do we prevent water pollution? So we'll dig down deeper into those questions. Let me invite Eduardo over here, who's sort of been our in-house water consultant at the fellowship program as well. Eduardo, over to you.
Thank you very much, Arpit, and greetings everyone. Thank you for being here. And well, my name is Eduardo Guevara. I am from Mexico. I am a water sciences PhD candidate in Universidad de las Américas Puebla. Here in UDLAP, we have the UNESCO Chair on Hydrometeorological Risks. It is an international program under the auspices of UNESCO, of course. And in this program, we emphasize the study on droughts and floods, essentially, and therefore water management is our most, well, the topic that we study the most. But one dimension of water management that is often overlooked is, of course, water quality management. Because, for example, in the UNESCO chair, we tend to emphasize on water quantity. Either we have too much during floods or too little during droughts. But we often overlook this dimension of water quality, which is very important. So I am excited to discuss a little bit about how to incorporate this dimension of water quality in water management. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Eduardo. And I think this is a very important topic from the perspective that whether it is about water or it is about education or is it about health, we've for many, many years just struggling with the questions of access and quantitative availability of things. And it's only recently where across policy questions we are now looking at quality and qualitative aspects of things. So very important and looking forward to discuss that. Purvi, over to you.
everyone. Thank you, Arpit, and thank you, Lauren, for designing this program such a way that we could talk about this important aspect. I did my PhD in wastewater microbiology, so this is very close to what I have seen in the field. And also, I'm a recent GPODS alumni from the last batch. I'm a member of YFPF Tokyo and steering committee member for LCOY Japan at the moment. The pressing thing that I would like to talk about a little today is that it's in water sector or any other sector. If we see when we talk about policy, the thing that bothers me the most is the gaps that needs to be understood while if we are designing policy or implementing it. It's the gap between the policy itself and its ground implementation is something that I would like to talk today. And I would take reference of researchers that have been through, and I would be happy to receive inputs. Thank you.
Absolutely, Purvi. I think, that's again another topic which cuts across various policy concerns, that how you design policies and how they're implemented. And there's a world of a difference between these two things. So probably, looking forward to looking at some examples with you as to how a particular policy was designed and how it was implemented in a very different manner, and probably did not deliver on the desired outcome, or had some unintended consequences. So happy to discuss that. Let me first jump in, and we are going to keep it quite open and informal. So also request the audience members to engage with us. If you want to raise your hands, ask your questions even while the discussion is going on, please feel free to do that. So because this is about a topic which needs as much participation as possible. So we are definitely here to encourage that. Now, let me first start with the issue of pollution. And that's something that I want Ishwarya to weigh in on. And then, perhaps Purvi and Eduardo could also talk a little bit about that. Now, Ishwarya, if you could throw some lights on, existing policies and mechanisms to deal with pollution and their successes and shortcomings, that would be really helpful. But in addition to that, if you could also probably talk about the fact that we have been able to identify sources of pollutions for so long, and we've been able to look at the fact that there are particular industries that are polluting industries. Now, despite that knowledge and despite a lot of governmental action, I see Ishwarya has probably dropped out. So I'm going to pose the same question to you both, Purvi and Eduardo, that despite that knowledge, governments have not been able to do much in actually bringing down the levels of water pollution, except for certain very specific regions and certain very specific cases. So, Ishwarya, I don't know if you got the whole of my question. Essentially, what I was asking is that, despite the knowledge of sources of pollution, we have been able to achieve precious little. What do you think is the reason behind that? And if you could just give us a brief overview around this whole issue of water pollution that personally affects me a lot, because I live in the Ganga-Yamuna plain in India, and these are the two rivers which are sort of the lifelines of the Indian subcontinent. And every day in New Delhi, or when I go to my hometown, I see Yamuna, especially the river, being utterly polluted, and many industries just throwing their wastes and effluents despite the government policies which are there in place to fine or stop those industries from doing that. So Ishwarya, over to you.
Thank you, Arpit. I mean, for every Indian, that is a very touching it, very disturbing subject, right? When we revere rivers so much, but we couldn't do much to protect the purity of the river. The thing is, when it comes to India, the industrialization and urbanization was very drastic. We have witnessed it in the past few decades, India, opening its market for the world nations. However, the reason that we don't, that we are struggling to ensure the water quality of a water board is that the regulatory apparatus has lagged behind. It was not as it didn't follow the pace with which the growth of the nation happened. The major gaps is basically the standard settings. For example, at most areas we don't have standards. The lack of standards for the ambient water quality. And when it comes to India, I think we should definitely look at some nations, especially the Scandinavian nations, as to how they monitor the quality of their water and enforce the legislations. Because as of now, the water quality in India is being, regulated by the Water Prevention and Control of Pollution Act 1974. And when it comes to Norway, which is known for its internationally for its water quality, the recent amendment and the revision of regulation happened in 2017. So, and as of now, we only have a national model bill for the management of groundwater. So we don't have much proper regulations in the first place. And again, the largest polluters in India is basically the way we dump our sewage with no proper treatment and the industrial effluents. Again, we don't have one rule can't be applied to every sort of kind of pollution, right? But that is what India is trying to do. So it needs a very fundamental approach and a very different approach from what we are doing now.
No, absolutely. That sets the stage very well. And if I were to add something to this, and this is for all of our panelists and audience members to probably register, is that one particular policy which I feel has not worked, and there have been renewed efforts towards that policy is. And I'm coming from a friend who was pursuing her PhD in giving rivers and forests rights of persons. So basically, rivers and forests would be able to go to the court, litigate, and you would consider them as real persons. Now, why I think that a sort of a thing hasn't worked is that if you go in the past, that's what's happened in India, that we have deified our rivers, we have deified our forests. We almost consider Ganga and Yamuna rivers as incarnations of gods and goddesses. And the idea, I can imagine, would have been at some point of time that you make these holy so that people do not disrespect it in terms of polluting it and violating its water quality levels. But that certainly has not worked. What we have seen is that people still go into Ganga and Yamuna. Now the Chhat Puja, I believe, is coming up, and what you'd be able to see in New Delhi is that people, you'd see the Yamuna River bubbling with foam, and that foam is essentially all pollutants. It's all chemicals just coagulating into foam and giving out a terrible stench. But people still getting into the river and worshipping over there, drinking that water. It is so what I mean to say is that element of worship has not stopped people from polluting the river, and the pollution has not stopped people from worshipping the river. So similarly, I don't think that giving rights of a person to rivers or personifying any of these, just like deifying did not work, I have my doubts whether personifying would. I am hopeful, but just wanted to put this out there. But now let me bring over Eduardo over here, and let's weigh in on the whole issue of water quality and the whole issue around how we were not really looking at the question of water quality at all, and now this has suddenly come to fore. So over to you, Eduardo.
Thank you, Arpit. I believe that at the end, water pollution is just another expression of the issue of linear economy, right? Because
Absolutely.
we firstly, or we historically, we have taken water for granted, and we extract water and we dispose it polluted in the same water bodies from where we take it, right?
Yeah.
So that is one dimension of the problem. So I believe that even if we don't turn water bodies into gods or divinities, we do have to transform our relationship with water bodies. That is something that I think. And also in Mexico, we also had an industrialization and urbanization process during the past century. And we established water quality standards. We created all of our environmental governance during the 90s. And actually recently, some months ago, we updated our water quality standards, both for potable water and both for water discharges in water bodies. And you may be tempted to think that this was the correct approach. And I believe so, because who doesn't want to have better quality standards, right? But the problem was that water utilities, water operators weren't given finance to update their infrastructure, water treatment plants, wastewater treatment plants, and be able to reach these limits, right? That is on one hand what happens in Mexico. We have a 50% of wastewater that is not treated, for example. And we have the standards, but there is not enforcement of these standards. The water authority that we have in Mexico, which is called Comisión Nacional del Agua, National Water Commission, does not have enough resources, human and finance, to enforce these standards, and that is why we don't comply, right? And this has provoked an emergence of like parallel markets, which is bottled water and water which is distributed in water tanks that supposedly complies with environmental standards.
Yeah.
In comparison with water utilities, right? And finally, just a brief comment on water quality monitoring. In the past, pollution wasn't ubiquitous. So if we find pollutants in a water body, we could take water from another water body and the problem was solved, right? But with this linear approach to water extraction, pollution or pollutants started to be ubiquitous. And right now, everywhere we look at, we have these pollutants, and we don't have like a pristine water body to take water from, right? So monitoring wasn't important. We didn't invest in that technical issue. So right now we know that when we study the water bodies, we know that we have pollution, but we don't continuously monitor water quality. So that is another opportunity, at least in Mexico. I believe that in India you have a similar problem, right?
Absolutely, absolutely. When I'm also listening to the issues that you pointed out around the Water Commission and that lacking resources and thereby not being able to subscribe to its own standards, it absolutely resounds the same story of what you see in India or what you see in other developing countries, where it's not as if the knowledge of standards is lacking over there. A lot of it is to do with just sheer resources, that how do you get your equipments, your inspectors, your other resources in place. And these are extremely hard questions to answer. But I think the terrific point that you've really made over here, which I believe would make for a great op-ed and something that should be discussed over and over and over again and would open a great research agenda, is that what we are seeing right now in water is really our lack of ability to look at circular economic models. It's the linear economic models that have led us to, all sorts of pollution. I'd say air pollution, I'd say water pollution, and so many more. Pollution of land and food, etc. Because we have just not been able to think circularly. And recently, I'm working very closely with a number of investors and a number of private sector firms. And as much as you look at all of these ESG standards and ESG audits, etc., what you find missing in that is the element of circularity, and that is something that we really need more courses. We really need more publications, more discussions, and a serious body of research that seeps down into the public discourse for us to fundamentally understand circularity. Because even if you ask me, or I'm sure many of us over here, if we intuitively have absorbed the idea of circularity, I would say, I can speak on my behalf, we haven't. I mean, I haven't. It would take so much of effort to actually understand the whole of life cycle of various products and processes to be able to understand circularity, and so much more work needs to be done on that. So I'd want to come back to this topic again and discuss this, because I think this is really important. But before that, let me go over to Purvi. And Purvi, let us hear from you about what you think is really lacking from a policy design perspective. Because implementation, sure, we know we don't have the resources. But as somebody had once said, that a policy that looks good on paper and doesn't work on the ground was never good on paper in the first place. So I would want to hear your views on that.
Yes, thank you so much, Arpit, and thank you, Eduardo and Ishwarya, for setting up the platform very rightly for me to, you covered and touched on the topics that I wanted to throw lights on. I am taking reference of one of the very strong research articles that I've read, and it's a Menard 2017. I would share it in the chat box once we're done talking, so it's a good resource to go through. And so the researchers are from the Stockholm International Water Institutions, and this must have taken them few years to come down to understanding how. So when I was thinking about the topic, and it is the thing that I wanted to indicate, and they've listed it so precisely that I'm taking their words directly in terms of the amount of gaps that they have identified, that quantitatively and qualitatively both ways. So they have categorized it into 4 major types of gaps that we see in water sector in terms of policy. One is what they say is we see the gap in terms of policy formation process itself. Then there are operationalization of policy where we have gaps. There are gaps related to characteristics and behaviors of stakeholders that we miss to see. And while we implement it, it's the major gap that they say it needs to be identified. And the last but not the least, what they say is we usually overreach. I mean, we try to formulate policies which are overreaching in terms of countries and situations which are current. We do not relate the current situations, and the ambitions are too high from a policy designer's perspective, that we try to put up the government or the nation to the level that we see, which is the most optimum one that we would like to reach. But you have to see to where we stand and where we want to go and what's the gap and how can we fulfill it in a phases. It's not a jump that you could take. So these are the broad categories that they have mentioned. And so getting into details, I would like to go with some of the examples that I can relate with the pollution as a sector. And I would try to concise to my timings. Arpit, if I cannot, then just remind me that, okay, Purvi, you're done.
No, for sure. We have sufficient time.
Thank you so much. Yes. So when I was reading that, and the thing that comes to my mind about the first thing, which is when what you were asking is what would be something which is as a gap I identify in terms of policy formulation is what I've seen is there are countries who would be aid dependent. I'm not talking about India. I'm talking global and in general. There would be people, there would be countries who would be provided with aids when it comes to water governance from UN and from other funding agencies. And in those regards, and in speaking of their situation, they are aid-dependent countries, and they do have external pressure to meet to the guidelines and timelines that they will be given. So that comes as it is reflected in some of the Tanzanian policies, which is for water, and that states that it gives you pressure to design something which is over the optimal that they could have achieved. So that is one thing. Then, as I mentioned, we try to design something which is away from the reality. We do not see the ideas. We do not see the number of liters waste or million liters a day waste, which is formulated and generated. And we try to put up margin as in 70% of the waste should be treated, when we don't know actual amount itself, what is being generated. And there are still gaps in making sewer lines. There are gaps in connecting cities and rural areas with the sewer systems. So when we don't know the actual amount, what are we trying to design as a treated percentage? So that is the thing. The major thing which comes into policy making is a political commitment. So if it doesn't come in the current political agenda, if it doesn't come in the current political commitment of a nation, then we lack to see that something would not be derived according to what is needed by a population. So there's a lack in the, and that forms a gap itself. And there's this thing that we forget to think of inclusivity of all voices, be it a rural population, be it somebody who is affected. Let's say we recently faced something in my own city. There's a canal which goes through the city, and it's a Sabarmati Rivers canal, and there are industrial zones located there, and the population which lives just across those banks have been facing tremendous issues of groundwater pollution because the industries are releasing water inside, untreated water into the ground. And not that the policymakers doesn't know it, not that the government doesn't know it, but they're still being unheard. They are not able to put their voices across the table, and it continues going on and on. So it's like we have to make sure that we listen to voices which are coming from ground. So these are overall things which I wanted to indicate in terms of policy formulation.
Why do you think their voices are not being heard, Purvi?
On a local basis, because I'm part of some committees and I can understand where they're coming from. So it's still a two-sided sword. One is there are people who are trying to take advantage of the situation, and they would like to, manipulate the current governance. That is one thing going on. And the other thing is that they try to, so if it's an election time going on in Gujarat.
Sure, in your state,
so,
yes.
Yeah. We are going to face elections. And so all the environmental issues are being suppressed very, very brutally. So that's because it's not the right time that they could be heard. I mean, I don't want to.
Can you elaborate on that? That why do environmental issues, just from a political scientist's perspective, that why would environmental issues, rather than taking a front seat during elections, are actually relegated to, the backwaters of the electoral?
Yeah, I had my own questions about it. And one time when I was trying to communicate with one of the local leaders, she's a woman, and she was somebody that I could talk to. And so when I offered that, these are the issues and which are burning issues. Why aren't we taking it in your election agenda? I mean, that would be something that people would appreciate if you take it as your agenda. So
yes.
No, people eventually go back to GDPs, and people eventually go back to how many employments you could generate in your past election time and era. And
and caste and community and all of that.
Yes. So, I mean, it's very hard to say it in this international forum, but yeah, that's the hard reality that we face here. So that was one part where I was trying to indicate gaps in the policy formulation processes. The other thing that I wanted to talk was operationalization. And so the thing
Before
we
get into that, I thought Ishwarya wanted to weigh in on your earlier point. Ishwarya, do you want to
please go on.
Oh, yeah. Actually, yes. In India, it's actually, I'm sorry. Basically, it's these corporate entities that are going to fund for the election, right? People can only vote, but these corporates can buy politicians. So I think that is one of the major issues why these social issues are being suppressed, since these entities can fund the election, with which the political parties,
Sure, and many of these entities may not still be very enthusiastic about the sustainability agenda. Okay, that could be one explanation.
Yes.
I think there's another explanation, and I would want some audience members, whenever they can, to weigh in on this, because we'd like to know your views. And any of the panelists would like to know your views on this. Is that somehow, and I speak with a lot of people even now on a daily basis who really think that not just water issues, but in general, sustainability is an elite agenda. Sustainability is an agenda that only the woke students or people who are very well educated or people who are beneficiaries of globalization care about, and it's not really the person on the ground who cares about sustainability. Now, as to how true it is, I would not discard that statement completely, because now one thing that I've learned is that even if the other person is telling you something that might sound completely ridiculous, they might be just expressing it in a different manner, but there must be some kernel of truth in what they're saying. Maybe they're not just putting it in the right way. And the fact that, electorates don't care so much about these issues during elections shows that, a lot of times, if you ask them that, okay, is water a problem in your locality, they'd say yes. But if you ask them to ascribe that to climate change, they would probably not be convinced. But I'm happy to also hear anybody's views over here on why is it considered an elite agenda, and what could change so that it is really not considered as an elite agenda, because all of the data shows that the worst impacts of any sort of pollution, whether water or any other, the worst impacted are the most vulnerable socioeconomically vulnerable groups of people. And it is the same group of people that, according to some people, they don't care about these issues. So it's a conundrum, and happy to hear anybody's thoughts on this.
Arpit, can I jump
Eduardo,
in?
yeah, please.
Yeah, well, I believe that is partly true, because we are used to the universal and Western view of development, right? So we are tempted to think that the only way to reach development is through, the exploitation of fossil fuels, or the combustion of fossil fuels, and the extraction of raw materials, the exponential extraction of raw materials, and so on. All these features of the linear economy I referred to previously, right? So, and that is why some countries are tempted to think that it is discussing sustainability is a privilege, right? Because they say, well, these developed countries, they have already developed, and they have done it through this Western approach, and now they have the privilege to discuss sustainability. But we didn't have that opportunity, and that is why the narrative of climate justice is so appealing, right? Because they say, well, you could do that, but right now we are underdeveloped, and since the system only leaves us the opportunity to do so through fossil fuels, but now you have, climate change concerns and emissions limits. So they
you're not letting us develop.
you are not letting us develop, right? So I was reading just yesterday that African countries, for example, are not willing to stop fossil fuels development because they say Europeans have already done so and they are not complying with their pledges or of financing in adaptation, in losses and damages to us, to underdeveloped countries now, right? So I believe that I don't know, it's a tricky issue because it polarizes the discussion of sustainability, right? But I believe that we should embrace the idea that, firstly, the development of fossil fuels is not the only way to development. That is one thing that I think we should embrace. And the other thing is that, we have to uncouple development from pollution overall.
Absolutely. No, I agree with you so much over there, Eduardo, because I think just more on a, philosophical and epistemological level, there is a commitment to thinking that there is only one pathway from getting from point X to point Y. And I think that is the biggest, logical error that people make, that the only way to success, if the West did it, or if, some of the other countries went from export-led, went through the growth path of exploiting resources and then, pursued export-led manufacturing-based growth, then every country and each and every context will be able to just attain growth through that path and that path only. I think that is a big, big mistake in the way that we perceive reality. Because what I can definitely say is that we will have a lot of countries that will follow the exact same path, but will still never be rich, because each country will have to find its unique path. If you're, it's almost like saying that if I did exactly the same things that, somebody that I admired did, I will be successful. And that would be the greatest folly, because I would not be successful because I am operating in a very different context, even if that somebody else is, in my family. Everybody comes from a very different context and has different resources and different environment, different internal capabilities, and that leads to different success pathways. And and that's a commitment that I think that a lot of people have, and it's hard to dispel this idea that we don't have to follow the Western model, and we need to decouple pollution in this. I have something more to add to this, and that's regarding one of a very celebrated Indian professor's speech at the World Bank, Dr. Raghuram Rajan's speech at the World Bank, where he said that, India does not have to follow the Chinese model of manufacturing-based export-led growth. Service-led growth can really be the non-polluting way of moving forward for India, which I think only makes sense. And if you look at the data, that's how India has been growing, not from a manufacturing-led growth, but a service-led growth. But that has apparently angered a lot of people over here that, how could you say that? And why do you care about environment so much? What about the food you put on the table? And, I always think that it's the services that are putting food on the table, not manufacturing so much for India. Anyhow, anybody else who wants to weigh in on that before we move forward with the other implementation gap that Purvi was talking about?
Yes, I would like to quickly add to the question that you asked, because it's a very essential question. This needs to be addressed by the sustainability enthusiasts and experts. Like, we should be able to convince the masses that this is what we need in the first place, right? Even Ishan Chaturvedi, like, to the participants who don't know him, he's the founder of Envipol, one of the partners with LCOY Japan. He told that circular economy, this model in itself is a very guarded topic. Only professors discuss this, and it is not very commonly known. Even I didn't know about circular economy before I joined GPODS fellowship. So it is a very guarded topic. And there are, like, we have learned about nations which, embrace this model, which are called the welfare economy nations. It consists of around 7 nations like Sweden, Canada, New Zealand. The thing is, let's say these nations are already developed.
Yeah.
And I have raised these questions before too. They are already developed, and they are like, they can compromise a little bit of their GDP and gross income to try and experiment with the circular economy model to see how the returns would be, how profitable it would be. But can Bhutan or Sri Lanka, like Bhutan owes like debt that is more than 100% of its GDP just to India. So can this nation afford to make this choice of, transferring to a circular economy model? Would that be beneficial for them when the circular economists themselves say that this model, focuses that it's and says that it's fine if we, totally don't focus on the GDP growth itself? So it is a very challenging question. Like for a commoner in India, if I provide 2 options, one is a plastic bottle and another one, a healthy and better alternative one, be it a steel bottle or a copper bottle, which cost around $700, and a plastic bottle costs around $15 to $20. Which one would he go for? All what he cares is, 3 times food in a day, a shelter and stuff. So why would he go for a costlier alternative? And so far, the world, like, we are expected to spend at least 9 trillion in a year to meet the sustainability targets, but we barely spend few billions. Nations are not ready to take accountability. If that is the case, then the transformation towards sustainability is going to be very challenging. And this also means that enough fund is not being channeled towards R&D, a cheaper alternative. So until then, the statement which you said might actually be a true statement, right? Unless we face the wrath of it, then where the nations will be forced to spend more into the recovery processes and stuff. The statement that you said might be true in a lot of sense.
No, absolutely, Ishwarya. And I think, there are 2 places where we have terribly failed. And Purvi, I'm coming back to you right after this remark. There are 2 places that we have absolutely failed, and they both sort of show the same thing. Number one is that we don't have any example right now, or any well-known example right now, of a country that was originally poor, at least during industrialization, because originally is a very long timeline. But let's say during the 18th, 19th century, that country was poor and did not take the traditional industrial route, took the sustainable route, and has transformed itself into a high GDP economy. We don't have any single example of that. And if we have regional examples, if we have national examples, please do share it with us, and please do share a lot more of that, because those are the examples we need to change others' minds. The other also is, quite similar to this. The other failure is that, as Ishwarya again mentioned about, the plastic bottle versus the steel bottle example, and that, I use the toothbrush example in, my lectures, that it's a plastic toothbrush costs 15 rupees versus, a bamboo toothbrush that costs 70 rupees. Which one would you go for if you're, in a low income country? The thing is that our industrialists, our technologists, our economists have frankly failed us in not being able to provide sustainable products for cheaper. We are still thinking that, if we are producing organic food, that should be only for a specific group of people who can afford the more expensive organic food. I've not seen mass scale produced organic food, which, everybody can consume. And what we've also failed is sort of establishing a real correlation between sustainability and high GDP. And as long as we think that, we can decouple people's aspirations for economic growth and people's aspirations to remain sustainable, we are never going to be able to solve the problem. So the root of that problem is not really, going out and talking to people and telling them that GDP is not of great importance. What is of importance is, sustainability. I don't think it's going to work. What's going to work is where we say that if you're more sustainable, you'll have higher GDP, right? That's going to work. Okay. With that, let's move on to Purvi, and then we have a comment from Lauren. We're going to take that up after Purvi takes us through the implementation bit. Over to you, Purvi.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Bring the conversation back to water and pollution and health outcomes.
Sure.
Sorry. So yes, it's a multi-layered issue, and it drags us to think about how sustainability or the circular economy would lead us to find solutions. But the former thing that I was talking about was the gap in the policy water policy sector, and what I think about things which need attention in terms of operationalization of the water or water pollution related policies. So what I see is there is no clear understanding of the policies. As we say, rules and norms need to be interpreted, translated, and monitored. So that's where the gap lies, that either they are not interpreted well, or they're not translated well on the ground, or they're not monitored. So in the operationalization sector, what happens is decision makers are quite away from the reality, and they attach themselves in administrative capacity, not in operational capacity. So that becomes a gap when it comes to water sector. Let's say if I talk about pollutions, then we all understand that there would be a agency which would be taking care of the monitoring of the norms that effluents are being released into either water or oceans or something like that. But the people who are making, so scientists are different who are doing research, and they give that this should be the limit. There's whole other sector which talks about and forms the policy, which do not know the basis of this. And there's this third administrative sector which forms the policy, and there's another field, and those are not really well connected. So there's a connection gap in if we want to operationalize it right. And there is another thing, what I would like to say is there is a mismatch of responsibility and stakeholders awareness. So all the layers that needed to be worked in the synchronization are not made well aware, as in you're not responsible for this, but you're responsible for conveying it rightly. You're not responsible for treating the effluent, but you're required to treat the this thing, or you're required to train the people rightly, or put the norms outright on blank page and say that, okay, COD is this is what I want. So those translations are not happening right, and thus we face the issue. I mean, there could be multiple other things, but what I'm trying to stick to is the timeline. And so this leads to confusion and loss of trust. So the agencies who are formulating the policies are not being trusted because industries think that they don't know the reality, and they're just giving us the norms like, and we have to go to 200 milligram per liter COD. And that's where there's a loss of trust on the agency who is formulating policy. And we tend to fail to see the confusion there, that, there has to be a better communication between people who need to implement it and who are following it, and the problems, the wall needs to resolve someday. So that's what I think. In the stakeholders' behavior, what we see very, very oftenly here is that there are conflicting interests. And this comes from the fact that water governance doesn't only go to the pollution, but it also has a groundwater. We also have rivers that we take care of, and other things. So when I say conflicting interests, there are very popular examples in India when the river water is flowing through two states. And if there is an election going on, then that would become, or if it's a rainy season and if there's flood, then it will become a political agenda rather than, taking care of the crisis. It would go into completely different era. And so it's not being addressed. I mean, the same could have been harvested. The rainwater could have been put into right place, but no, we would just want to take it into a different regime and then use it for your personal gain. So there are conflicting interests when it comes to water sector, and there are opportunistic behaviors that is being seen. And it's the stakeholder behavior is something that is overlooked always when the policy is being made when we think of pollution and water as core. Because when I say opportunistic behavior is currently we have all seen that it's been commercialized. The water supply, drinking water supply, potable water supply has been commercialized largely because there are people who think that the municipal water is not good enough for them to drink. And so again, there is lack of awareness because we don't understand what would be the quality which has been supplied to you versus what is the quality of the water what municipality is trying to serve. Probably it would be better, but the common people, they're not really aware as in how the city governance is working to serve you best. So that's something it's been taken as an opportunistic behavior by the commercial sector to put up a mineral water plant and supply 20-liter carboy every day to your place. Rather than this could have been simply taken care of rather than putting so much of finances into it and commercializing it. So there are layers that need clarification, and there are responsibilities allocation which we do not have right framework, I would say, to take care of. And so this particular research suggests that there are macro level agencies and there are micro level agencies, but the connection between them is missing. So what they propose as a solution is a meso institution. So it could be something which is an entity, it could be mechanism, or it could be tool, which would connect a macro organization which are designing policies and the micro one, which are actual players. But we need some institutions, some tools in between, which would help us to translate and put things in right place. So as it's not being taken advantage of, but it is also being rightly translated to the people who need. So it is it's something that I like, and I wanted to put on floor that it could be youth, it could be people who are of this era and who are thinking sustainability, which would bring in awareness, and which could be entities to get the policies right. Thank you so much for giving me.
No, thank you. Thank you so much, Purvi. You've touched on a lot of you've given me so much of food for thought over there. And I was actually thinking when you were taking us through that, picture of how all of these disconnects exist, that two potential solutions that come to my mind, which could be pursued independently or together, are that one, we need greater public participation in governance, which we don't typically have. And there are some examples in the world where, the public at large are first educated, and then there are workshops, and then there are, consultative sessions with different groups of people before any decision is taken. In fact, I worked on a very interesting project with the Tompkins County government in Ithaca in upstate New York, where public participation is being taken extremely seriously, where the local government would have to consult the public before taking any major decision, and without which they would not get certain federal government grants if they are not doing that. So, the Title VI of the US Civil Rights Act mandates local governments to do that. So I think that is certainly a solution worth looking into. And the other solution, which might look like complete opposite of that, and that's somewhat what this paper also suggests, is to have technocrats deal with stuff. Okay. And when you say that, okay, we need to set up an institution that would coordinate between all of these different entities, essentially we are talking about bringing in technocrats, because institutions are managed by technocrats and managed by people who are professionals and who know the content and are less influenced by the politics of it, etc. And that might raise some questions. That might raise some questions that, okay, do you want to technocratize everything? I don't know. I think it needs to be a mix. But yeah, back to you, Purvi. You were saying something. And then let me come to Edvardo.
Yes, I wanted to say that, just not technocrats, it could be a mixture. So what I think what essentially we all are seeking is balance. So it should not be, yes, so it should not be this or that, but yeah, people who are
a balance.
Good communicators, yes.
No, certainly. Eduardo, any thoughts on this segment of our discussion?
Yeah, I was thinking about this issue that you were discussing. You put, Arpit, the example of the toothbrush and the difference in prices between a sustainable one and another one that is an industrial one, let's say. And it's very interesting because I recalled a book that is from an author, which is Edward Barbier, which I believe is an economics professor. I don't recall right now the university, but it is an economic professor that discusses this issue of water underpricing. He refers to water specifically, but this can be extended to other natural resources, right? He says that since water, well, not only water, but clean water was abundant, it didn't have value at all. And right now that it is scarce, it does have a value, and therefore should have a higher price, right? But and in parallel, since the externalities, since all that we have discussed, pollution and extraction and injustice, etc., these externalities were not identified. They weren't incorporated into the price of the stuff, right?
Yeah.
So this obviously right now reflects through the emergence of these markets that Purvi was discussing, right? That you don't buy your water, or you don't pay your water in your water utility, but you have another provider, let's say, right? And by the way, in GPODS, we also study systems thinking, and there is this system archetype, which is called success to the successful, right? So since you keep buying water from these alternative providers, you keep giving them more power and obviously more money for them to invest. But at the end, you are paying more for this resource, right? So I am convinced that, for example, in local terms, the way that we can pay the less for more quality water is through a network approach, because water is a natural monopoly, right?
Yes.
So the costs of water and wastewater treatment, if they are distributed, at the end we are going to pay less, right? But I believe that this is only another expression of this hyper individualistic, let's say, outcome of the Western capitalist model, right? So at the end, the people with more money can pay for clean water, while others don't have this possibility, right? So this is another outcome of this approach. So I'm just reflecting of the issue of the technocrats. So give me just 2 seconds.
Certainly take your time. But I think two things that you said I think are very important, and I am absolutely in love with the idea of this whole concept of natural monopolies, and that's something that we haven't explored to such detail. That when think of nature as a monopolist over some of these resources, and if you distribute the costs properly, then you can actually reduce the overall price of these resources. So lots to think about that. And the other thing is about the whole pricing aspect of it, which could be a good thing, which could be a bad thing, but perhaps that's the way forward, because we are eventually living in a system whose underlying rules are cost and benefit and capitalism, as we might want to call it. So a lot of times, I was earlier of the thinking, and I'm somehow partially still of the thinking, that it's a bad thing that we are moving into a world where every resource is being privatized. And when I say that being privatized, I mean that they are being converted from a public good or a common resource pool to a private good. This is something that we discuss in my GPODS lectures as well, that, you make it rival and you make it excludable. So water is now the only safe water. Fast forward into the future is the packaged drinking water that you can get and you have to pay for it. And the only safe air you can breathe is in a room which has an air purifier. So you've also paid for it. So, gradually what's happening is that we are privatizing all of the public goods and common resource pools. And I still partly think that that's a bad thing. That's a terrible thing to happen. But a little bit of my thinking was also changed through interacting with this other GPODS mentor, who mentioned that, in Mumbai, for example, which has a large slum area where, water pricing is not really in place. What typically happens is that, in the affluent areas, you have enough water supply, etc., and they get water which is 1/8 of the actual price at which people would really pay for water in a slum area. So because in slum areas you don't have the right water pipelines going, etc., so they literally have to bring in private tankers which are full of water, and then they distribute water to each of those households, and that turns out to be actually more expensive. And his line of argument was that we have this sort of a disparity where the poor pay a lot more for the same resources and the rich pay a lot less for the same resources, because we don't have a very clear pricing mechanism in place. And if we had a pricing mechanism in place, it might look as if it is the worst thing, but then it might actually help the equity agenda, which I thought was a very interesting way of looking at things. So Ishwarya, if you would want to reflect on any of these aspects of our discussion, I know that we have sort of unpacked so much in an hour, but yeah, over to you.
I mean, a amazing discussion, because we solution-oriented discussion. I really loved it. The thing is, everyone here, not just the panelists, but also the participants, know how essential the water, a safe drinking water for, personal use and domestic purposes is essential. And, but it is time that we need to ensure that this sustainability and safe drinking water is ensured to everyone across the world, because things are going to happen that we might not be even aware of now, because the earth might be going through some irreversible process. Last week, I came across an article about a report and study made by the Ottawa University's professors. And let me just briefly get you all through what happened. In 2016, there was this outbreak of anthrax in Siberia. So while discovering, people were talking about leakage from Russian labs and stuff, but the reason was the heat wave experienced by Siberia, which actually caused to melting of permafrost, which exposed a reindeer, due to which a young child died. And now this research by the Canadian university professors shows that the risk of viral spillover may be very higher closer to melting glaciers. So all the viruses that we know are on one side, and there is unknown and alien viruses that are in glaciers. So imagine these glaciers melting, and these viruses making all the marine biodiversity their host, and the humans who consume those biodiversity. So this is a very huge risk. So water pollution is not just the domestic, how we manage our domestic water and how we treat our sewage, but also ensuring that we are somehow prepared for the unknown and unforeseen circumstances in terms of our policies and preparedness. And similarly, for the question which you raised about recognizing these water bodies as separate legal entity, will that make any change? If we take India's case, we have a doctrine in place called public trust doctrine, which basically states that the government should take care of these natural resources like as if it belongs to the public, and the trustee would be the government. The government is entrusted with the responsibility of taking care of the natural resources, which most of the times the government had failed. So if we provide a separate legal entity to these water bodies or natural resources, again, when we go to the remedy part, the case will be filed in the judiciary stating that this separate entity is suing before the court of law, and before it was a public interest litigation. But the behavioral change or the political will is all that matters, whether it's recognized as a separate legal entity or not, is what I personally feel.
No, absolutely. And one thing that I tell a lot of my lawyer friends, in fact, a lot of my family members are lawyers, that the first thing that a public policy professional imbibes is to learn that laws don't solve real problems. It is, laws are not a magic wand that can really solve all of the problems. A lot of times laws are relegated to being ink on paper, and what really changes, some laws are great and they do solve problems, but what solves problems, as we talk about in our GPODS fellowship, as well as a combination of systems thinking and game theory. If your law does not push you towards a good Nash equilibrium, people are anyway going to go to a good or a bad Nash equilibrium in any sort of a policy. I know we are getting technical over here, but without going there, let me now take Lauren's question and we'll open it up to the audience after that. So Lauren is asking, and anybody can take it up. I think all of us should take it up. What are some concrete ways that we as a global community can move the conversation on development more firmly into the conversation on sustainability? Rather, how can we convince the global community that these points are already part of the same conversation? The ideas are not new. The 2030 agenda has already affirmed inseparability of people, planet, and prosperity, peace, and partnerships, and yet interconnectivity of these points remains unfulfilled. That's a lot to unpack, and then we're going to go over to Tuance, if I'm pronouncing your name correctly, and apologies if I'm not. Please feel free to unmute yourself and correct me. I'll move on to your question, but over to Lauren's question first. Whoever wants to take it up. It's a hard question.
Well, I would say that countries need to influence each other. If Canada or Sweden are going to, have the transition to sustainability or circularity, this movement would somewhere in the international forum influence other nations to try that model. And, and also the behavioral change. We need to highly focus on the narrative that we put forward. And this has a lot to do with what, different stakeholders, especially the youth, since it's LCOY is dominated by youth delegates, we have to do, because we need to put forward the narrative, and we need to push for policy reforms and revision of the existing policies. And I completely agree with the point, and we also somewhere address the point of interconnectivity of these issues, because prosperity, peace, and partnership, they have the synergy, between them. But the thing is, like you mentioned, we need to share knowledge and resources, because countries spend lots of billions when it comes to their defense. And somehow they should also similarly focus on ensuring that their water quality is sufficient, because according to the UNICEF report, around 700 children die every day just because of diarrhea. So we need to focus on, narratives should be made stronger. We need to advocate for the rights we want to establish as ours.
So I'd actually like to build on what Ishwarya said over here, before I invite Purvi and Eduardo, that what we certainly need are, again, quote unquote, institutions that can look at interconnectivity. And we need to have a specialized, a very different sort of institutions which are dispersed and networked yet dispersed institutions, and we want those institutions to become a lot more prominent. And what I want to say over there, without being very self-congratulatory for the people who are attending over here, when I say institutions, I'm not necessarily referring to organizations. Institutions could be organizations, but institutions are, again, rules and practices and procedures to develop certain common mental models around doing things. Okay, that's what institutions really are. And if you look at it in a way, again, that's where not being self-congratulatory comes in. These are the type of forums which are needed, and we might think that we are just talking over here, we are just doing some chit chat around these ideas. But if you actually look at it, some of us over here are lawyers, some of us over here are technologists, some of us over here would be entrepreneurs or would be advising policymakers or would be policymakers. And what's happening over here is that we are somehow approximating to a more complete mental model, a more comprehensive mental model of how policies and all of these different aspects should be interconnected. So at least we are leaving this room with some mental models that could be useful, okay, in building these interconnections. And when we go out there into our work, it will naturally seep into the advice that we give or the practice that we conduct in our professions. Now, I think that these forums right now are way too few and too infrequent, and there's a real need. It's not about being a coffee table intellectual, but there's a real need for these forums to emerge so that people can at least develop mental models of thinking in the interconnected manner. And it is only through those mental models will real action and real processes would emerge. So that's my 2 cents in it. Over to you, Purvi, and then Eduardo, and then we move to Tuan's question, after which I think we can close our discussion. So Purvi, over to you.
Thank you, Arpit. I will go back to the chat and read what she said. What she is trying to ask us is that how can we convince the global community that these points are already part of the same conversations? And the thing that comes to my mind, there are two parts of it. What I can understand. One is global community is one section is where again there are policymakers who are globally and who are part of or are the influencers in the policy making. And the second segment comes to my mind is people who are grassroots players. So when we are trying to communicate to both the communities, I think, as you said, yes, what we need is the forums like this where we can share our mental models and understanding about the whole issue related to water pollutions and policies and stuff like that. That is one. The other thing that comes to my mind is that it's important for me if I want to communicate these things to the grassroots players and common people as we see who are affected and vulnerable community, then what comes to my mind is the large amount of information needs to be translated into regional languages, and the awareness has to be created with more frequent consultations and public awareness campaigns. That comes to my mind where we have to approach the whole thing with two ends. We also have to make policymakers and keep them in loop while we make the community more aware about it. So the one thing that I feel is in one of my recent exploration, I went to public hearing of one of the companies and in which we were protesting. But when we went to the grassroots level and when we talked with the villagers who were getting affected by the effluent itself, they were not aware why were they there, why were they favoring the company, or why we were protesting against it. So it's a very rural place, and it's a very recent example. It's been covered in media, national media, and everything. But the people who were just bought by company, they were not aware why are they supporting them. So if they were aware that okay, their own land is getting affected, then they might not be. And the gap that I saw there was the translation of information. So that's something which would we can create change in both ends. That's what I think.
Absolutely, but just to add one thing to what Purvi you said, that I think that awareness is super important, but there needs to be a more deliberate design to awareness programs, because there's this thing called the knowing doing gap, which means that awareness does not always translate into action. So we probably need, and something that we are missing is real deliberate evaluation and monitoring programs around awareness campaigns, to see what worked, what did not, and how can we improve some of these campaigns, which I think is super, super important.
Yes, okay. Absolutely. Thank you for adding.
Thank you, Purvi. And let me go over to Eduardo, and then we go over to Tuan's question.
Thank you, Arpit. Just a quick disclaimer. I'm not sure if I'm going to answer the question, but because I am putting a rhetorical question after that question. But you mentioned previously that we don't have an example of a country that has jumped this process of industrialization, pollution, and all that comes in towards development. But I don't know if we have an example of not a country, of course, but of a smaller community that has done so. I don't know.
I'm thinking about that.
That is why I said it was a rhetorical question, because I don't know. If someone in the audience knows, please let us know, because I'm just reflecting about it, because, and as Purvi
I'm sure they're out there.
Yeah, absolutely. But perhaps that is why the information won't flow from the top to the bottom, but the other way around. Like Purvi was saying earlier in this session, we have to make these voices on the ground being heard, even at this high-level international fora, right? Because maybe they obviously don't have the exact formula to make this happen at a country level, but we can be. I may sound romantic, but we can be inspired by this example. We can be motivated by this example to take these lessons. How do they relate with water? We were discussing water pollution, right? So how do they relate with water? How do they treat their water bodies to keep them clean, right? For example, and from other issues as well, we can learn, right? So I don't know. That is something that I was thinking about while I was reflecting on this question.
Absolutely. I mean, having those examples would be super, super important. And I'm sure that some of those examples are documented. They just need to be, spread across. Lauren is saying that Kampong economy models. Lauren, could you tell us a little bit about that very briefly over here? That would, I think, would be of great benefit to the audience, if you're able to unmute yourself.
Sure. Just to add briefly, so this word kampong is from Southeast Asia, and we see these kind of models coming around in Cambodia, Malaysia, even in, very few now, but Singapore as well. And I think that this is a kind of village model, but it's a very evolved form of circular economy, basically. But it has greater implications than just economy. It also adjusts the way the community and culture relate to one another, which I think drives this economic aspect deeper into the lives and the minds of people, and it ties it into this human aspect and the interconnectivity of everyone. the way that it's able to exist nicely in this kampong setting is, of course, this is a microcosm of larger economy. But I think that the lessons there are very strong, and I find it very inspiring, actually.
Certainly. So there we have it, something interesting to look into, the Kampong model. Thank you so much, Lauren, for sharing that. And I know of the presence of certain what we call in India model villages, which also follow certain sustainability practices. We have to still figure out how they're doing GDP-wise, economy-wise, and if there's a strong correlation over there, we might have certain models that might just work very well. Okay, so now let us take Tuan's question before we close our discussion. We have about 8 minutes, so brief comments over there, please. So Tuan is asking, I'm curious about some pathway strategies the government in your locations about sustainable water. For example, in my Vietnam, we are heading to revised law on land use, which is promised to protect sustainable use of water also. So yeah, it could probably be some law which has already been implemented, or some law that you're enthusiastic about and seeing. So it's a difficult one. I mean, I'm racing my brains to figure out. But Purvi, yes.
Yeah, so about that. So recently, there have been 2 revisions in terms of, one is about the water quality, treated water quality norms that has been revised by Indian government. That was a recent development that we saw, and they are trying to make it more stringent, but I am fearful that there needs more consultation with the industrialist and the community which are trying to treat it. That is one thing. It's about the treatment law and effluent treatment law. And the second thing that recently happened in 2019 is Indian government formulated a whole ministry called Ministry of Jal Shakti.
Yes.
So that was a 2019 event that happened, and that sounds promising. However, we still need to see some actions from it and implementation from the ministry itself. But it's one dedicated ministry altogether, other than Ministry of Environment and Forest, which India already had. This is just to deliver water and effluent quality standards. So that's something that sounds promising to me if it's about the local governance that's been asked. Thank you.
Absolutely. If I were to go with an example, I would probably say that, not a particular example, but 2 books written by a professor of mine. This guy's name is Professor Norman Uphoff. He's, in his late 80s, early 90s, but he's written 2 books called Reasons for Hope and Reasons for Success, that really look at successful, community development cases. And my idea is that it is probably over there, rather than in, ministries, or rather than coming up with new laws or coming up with new policies, which I'm usually very enthusiastic about. Probably the idea is to change the rules of the game from the bottom up, and the Reasons for Hope and Reasons for Success are great books to look at that. And one idea that I really took from that book was that, if, for example, if you know about Grameen Bank, the micro lending institution, if Muhammad Yunus, who got a Nobel for that, started out by conceptualizing an institution or an organization to solve this problem of local poverty, it would have never have happened successfully. What he did was that he, through his own little money, when he was a professor, tried to solve the problem of 2 or 3 people, initially just 1 person in his locality. And that's how, that's again coming back to systems thinking, that how you start a very small model and that takes a life of its own and that keeps growing. So I think that, starting from a very micro scale and then, letting it, quote unquote, go viral is probably, or to nurture it to go viral is probably the way as well. So that's my 2 cents. Over to Ishwarya and then to Eduardo.
Well, I won't say this is a policy initiative, but this is something that I'm recently following very much. This is the work of one single person with his team. So he basically engages with restoration of water bodies. So yeah, this person is also called and known as the Pond Man of India. His name is Ramveer Tanwar. And so initially he was an IT professional, but he was not very contented with the work that he was doing. So he thought that, like, after observing that how the local water bodies are not being used properly and is not in a condition where it can be a habitat for fishes and other species, thought of restoring water bodies. And now, like, in recent years, he's being very successful with his efforts. Like, he's engaging with lots of corporate entities, where the CSR of the corporate entities are being given to his project, which he uses to restore, process the water bodies in the northern parts of India. This work is amazing, and if replicated in different states by different teams, I think it would be a great way to restore the water bodies that has been already compromised.
No, I absolutely agree. And over there, my only thing that I'd just like to put this little thing in your head is that I also remember meeting and having a great conversation with somebody who's called the Waterman of India. He has been awarded the Raymond Magsaysay Award earlier because he was able to just like Mr. Tanwar, this guy is instead of rejuvenating ponds, he rejuvenated certain rivers in dry states such as Rajasthan, etc. But now what I actually, and with all due regard and respect to their work, what I also feel is that, here was a person who could rejuvenate rivers and who could, do all of these unthinkable things. And somewhere, these body of works, they hit a peak and then new work stops happening. And I don't know where that happens, where and why that happens. Is it, and I think that, I pursue it as a matter of research rather than, ascribing any intentions. I think the work that they've already done is just 1,000x, million x more than what many of us are able to do. But it's interesting which means that I'm not talking about any malified intentions, etc. here, but it's essentially to look at that how some of these folks, they are able to make a lot of impact and then somehow, plateau and nobody else takes it up, or when they probably reach out to the corporates and the governments, you start going to panels and you start getting trapped in a lot of these things which never really translate into, maybe the corporates and the governments would co-opt them but would never really implement their agendas, and maybe they should not have gone to the governments and the corporates in the first place. So it's pure bad strategy. So I don't know, but it's worth looking into, and I hope that some of their work are again implemented and enhanced and scaled. So that's the only thing that I think about. Okay, let me go over to Eduardo and then we close our discussion for today.
Thank you very much, Arpit. Just very quickly, I was just thinking about some strategies, but I couldn't because I just came up with anti-examples of strategies in Mexico. I know I'm seeing the glass half empty, but anyway, sure. What I wanted to share with you is that since 2012 in Mexico, we recognize the human right to water, but we are 10 years behind creating the law to regulate the guarantee of the human right to water. So that is an opportunity that we have. But this actually triggered a deep discussion within Mexico with what are we doing with water policy, including water pollution control, of course. And everyone started to have a lot of discussions about it. And there are some water utilities that are making some strategies to with their price strategies. For example, in Mexico City, this was actually a problem. I am going to explain why, but they say, well, we have people that are willing to pay more for water and people who don't have resources to pay for water. So we are going to make these price strategies so we have a differentiated tariff, let's say. But the problem was that this was implemented after the 2021 elections, which in the west of Mexico City, the opposition party won. And curiously, they were the ones that had to pay more for water. So everyone, they were not willing to pay because they thought the water utility was using water as a political currency, right? So they were punishing the electorate because they didn't vote for them, right? For them. And conversely, they were like giving a gift to the voters that did vote for the current party in Mexico City. So that was a political problem right there in Mexico City. But anyway, the thing is that there is an important discussion going on. We haven't reached a consensus on this general law that I was discussing, since there is this polarization. I do observe a polarization in the water problem in Mexico. We have these opposite positions that says, for example, what you were saying, Arpit, about privatization. Some argue that water should be privatized in Mexico, and other ones say that water should be always a public good. But I don't know if we can have something in between. We don't have enough money to invest in all of our infrastructure, so we do need private participation, but in a very well-regulated scheme. But anyway, that is what is going on right now in Mexico.
Probably need a separate sustainability parliament to discuss these issues. But yeah, no, what I agree with you, Eduardo, is that a lot of times some of the political actions stall a lot of well-intended policies. And this is one suggestion for all of the policymakers over here, is never to, discount politics when you're planning for good policy or sustainability outcomes. Because, and this is one thing that we really underline at GPODS, is that if you're one of those who throws their hands up in the air and says that everything was designed well, my policy was designed well, all of the plans were in place, but it's because the politics that we failed, that means that you were naive enough to not include politics into your own theory or modeling or solutioning. So you have to be very real and integrate policy, politics, and sustainability together. Now, with that, we have already exceeded the time by about 4 minutes. I think that this has been a fantastic discussion. I got to learn so much, and it went into so many different directions, but all tied into something which was very meaningful. This is one of those recordings that I would love to see and revisit once again. But thank you so much, Eduardo, Purvi, Ishwarya, and all of the members in the audience, YPFP Tokyo and LCOY, Lauren especially, for bringing all of us together. It was an amazing experience, and I hope you guys have a nice day, evening, morning, and I hope that some of the mental models we are leaving out with over here would influence your practice and advice outside of this discussion as well. Take care. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.